Please have yourselves.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's it. Okay, so I will start my speech in my next word. CanCon regulations prove to be inefficient when, in the end, consumers themselves do not watch the productions proposed by CanCon. And I will go to prove that in my speech. First of all, a flagging. I will explain to you what is CanCon, what those regulations really works in our scenario, and I will give the characterization about what the CanCon is not effective. And then I will bring you my first argument that it is inefficient. First of all, what is CanCon? Canadian content refers to a series of regulations and policies in Canada that aim to promote and protect Canadian cultural production, ensuring that a certain percentage of broadcast content on television, radio, and other platforms is created by Canadians. Another point, and also the CanCon, avoid Canada being overpowered by USA production, but they are not facing that, and this part it will be proven in my second speech. First of all, what these regulations and requirements really works. In radio, for example, Canadian radio station, at least 35% of the music they air, it's Canadian content, and that is a requirement. Another regulation about the TVs. At least 60% of the programming during prime time must be Canadian content. And now about our actual word. Let's talk about these regulations because it's inefficiently. Those regulations are so restrictive, making that Canadians don't watch these productions on TV, for example. The consumers want to choose what they want to watch. So they don't want to watch what CanCon reproduced on TV. What's that? For the consumers, they have this opportunity to choose what they want to watch. They will choose the streaming devices because they want to have the liberty to choose what they want to watch. So if they are not agreeing what they are proposed to watch on the TV, they will choose other streaming. They will choose the streaming because then on the streaming they will have this liberty to choose what they want to do. What's the problem of not watching the TV productions of CanCon? One, the consumers will just watch the TV. So they will just watch the TV if they want to watch it's on. So if they don't like it, what it's going through in it's passing in TV, they will not watch. Second thing, the CanCon productions are not too good because these productions need subsidies. Another thing that we need to say that to CanCon have the movies in a promote to expand and export for other countries, they need to have the same. They need to observe what the consumers want to know, and we know that the consumers are connected to what is big, and we all know that Hollywood, it's big, it's strong, and the consumers want that. Consumers like what Hollywood's produce. So in a kind of thing, what CanCon reproduce to achieve the consumers, it's similar to what Hollywood shows. And that's why the productions, it's not too good and needs too many subsidies that I will explain better. And again, if the consumers, it's don't watching the TV, the CanCon regulations, it's not working. Impacts of the problem that are in our status quo. First, the time prime hours that CanCon obligates to show their Canadian context are expensive. CanCon is spending money to show those productions on TV, and the consumers are not watching. So this expensive, and it's not helping at all. Panel, realize that it's not return. CanCon company spends to put their productions on time prime hours and TV. So in the end, the consumers don't watch the TV because they want to have the choice. They want to have a choice what they want to watch, and they end up going to other digital platforms as no thank you, as Netflix and all. So I accept your reply.
Oh, you
before.
said what?
Yeah.
What if they want to watch it?
What, sorry?
What if they want to watch it?
If they won't watch it, we are not like debating this motion, because if they won't watch it, the regulations of CanCon will work, and we are not discussing that. Because if they won't watch, CanCon regulations are working and not going on. We are talking here about those regulations. The regulations that CanCon aim to promote, it's going through the TV. It's going through the persons and the consumers watching the TV, and they are not watching. That's why the things that CanCon aim to promote, it's not working. Now, going through my first argument, inefficiency. CanCon spend money and don't bring benefits. Metric 1. The goal of CanCon will be achieved if the consumers watch their productions. That's not happen in opposition scenario. Metric 2. The companies are losing revenue and losing consumers. What's that? The high investments in those productions, as why the prime time hours, in the prime time hours, for in the end of the day, do not achieve the consumers. They are paying and they don't have in the return, because the consumers are not watching in those prime time hours, are going to other streaming devices. Another thing, let's think in our world, a proposition world, without the CanCon. We will have liberty of the consumers choosing what they want to watch. Second thing, with this liberty, we are resolving the issue of consumers don't watching TV, an issue on opposition side. Second thing, the productions will be allocated to what people want to watch. And these allocated productions will generate more revenue for the companies. No, thank you. When this content will be allocated, each person's demands for content will increase. So in our side of the house, this is better for the consumers because they will have the liberty to choose, and it's better for the business, because in the business, they will spend money in something that gives a return, different in case of opposition. In our scenario, companies stop spending in these prime hours, where they not obtain a return, and start to have more demand, generating more revenue. This is beneficial for the consumers, who can now choose what the content that they want to watch, and will generate revenue for the companies, which previously did not see results in their investments. That's why I'm so proud of proposals. Thank you so much.
I take the first proposition speaker and welcome the first proposition speaker.
My time starts in 3, 2, 1. In a world where culture everywhere, especially Canadian culture, is being oppressed or overshadowed by other countries or companies, we need things like CanCon to help protect our values and our media. Hi, I'm the first speaker of opposition, and today I'm going to give refutation, some framing for our side, 2 contentions, and explain why CanCon is so very important for Canada. So starting off with some of the opposition framing, when did CanCon regulations come to be? Well, when the regulations for radio came into effect in the 1970s, they not only constituted a cultural strategy, but also laid out a long-term vision for the future. Key term, long-term. Back then, Canada barely had a functioning music industry, too few recording studios, a lack of promoters, managers, and producers, a tiny collection of domestic record labels, a steady brain drain of talent to the United States, and a general, if unfair, sense that Canadian music was inferior to that from other countries. Now, in order to win this debate, the burden for side opposition is that we must prove that CanCon regulations have fulfilled the reasons as to why they were created in the first place. This means that we must prove on how CanCon was able to successfully fulfill its purpose, and why we should not oppose it or regret it because of what it has done and contributed to Canada, and what it can continue to do to help secure more progress in Canadian media and Canadian culture in media. We win if we prove that CanCon remains necessary today to protect Canadian media, prevent American media dominance, and support Canadian artists. Because CanCon was necessary in the past, it is necessary today, and it will continue to be necessary. Now moving on to some brief refutation, the first speaker of side proposition said that the regulations on the percent of content that must be Canadian are too restricting. However, we say in Canada, we have plenty of Canadian artists and culture that already fulfill these quotas. Then they talk about how this isn't enough content, but again, we think otherwise. Canada does have a very significant amount of resources for filmmaking. That's actually why very large parts of Canada are called Northern Hollywood. And as they say, there are limited options. We again say that CanCon quotas aren't extremely high and hard to meet, so there is still an amount of foreign media available if you do not want to watch Canadian content. They also say that CanCon is killing the economy because Canada doesn't have enough to make its own content, but let's break it down. Firstly, it's untrue, as I've already stated earlier, but secondly, even if it's true, and even if Canada doesn't have sufficient means of making media, then wouldn't CanCon be the reason, or wouldn't CanCon help Canada actually learn to make media itself and learn to innovate? We can't always rely on different forms and different countries of media. We need to learn how to make our own content sooner or later, so why not be sooner? What's so bad about this? Now moving on to some, my first contention, but first I'll take a POI. If the opposite proposition can give one.
As you said, Canada, a lot of films and whatever are shot there. This happens because US is investing in them, not because of CanCon.
I disagree with that because actually there are lots of films that are just purely Canadian, as we will give examples on later on. Now moving on to my first contention. Media is an extension of culture, and CanCon regulations exist as a form of cultural protectionism. But why is it so critical to protect and promote Canadian media? Firstly, cultural narratives. Perhaps more relevant than ever, Canadian sovereignty and identity is under attack. It's no secret the Americans and also other countries are taking over us. It's no exaggeration to say that a society that almost exclusively consumes American media is one that is less likely to see the problems with American territorial threats. While this would have been a borderline conspiratorial claim to make even a year ago, even 2 years ago, even a few months ago, it's clear right now today that Canadians need to be aware of the media that they consume, especially in light of today's US-Canada tensions. Canada in the past has often been viewed as inferior to many countries, if not Great Britain and the UK, then America. CanCon was literally established to ensure that in Canadian media and Canadian producers, they would actually be growth and they would become famous without having to rely on other countries' music industries, as Proposition is trying to encourage. CanCon was created to protect Canada's identity and Canadian content creators, as well as the Canadian culture. Right now, just like how in past Canadian culture and Canada's identity was being smushed and suppressed by other larger industries around it. Something that prioritizes saving Canadian culture and Canadian uniqueness is ever more than needed. CanCon is here and it is able to provide this like how it did in the past. Secondly, access to opportunity. On a more general level, however, this was the only way for Canadian artists to actually gain international respect and success. As mentioned in our framing, CanCon rapidly accelerates the development of Canadian media industry, and it creates a demand for Canadian content. Side Proposition will probably make arguments, or has already made an argument, about how media quotas are unprincipled because the best form of media is one in which creatives can innovate to their desire. The harsh reality is that this freedom doesn't exist for Canadians, or rather didn't prior to CanCon's regulations being implemented. In a world where radio stations balked at playing Canadian material, there was no opportunity to compete with the best in the world. All the attention given to American and British media was smothering Canadian music in the crib. Essentially, Canadian musicians have a hard time making it onto Canadian radio because they lack the tools and resources to hone their craft. However, like stated prior, CanCon was basically one of the sole contributors to why Canada actually has a functioning and still developing to this day media and music industry. Since CanCon enforced regulations that directly benefited all Canadian producers, directors, and media creators, it led to those industries fluctuating and expanding in Canada without being overshadowed by other countries and without having to rely on industries, or on their industries. This gave far more opportunities to so many more Canadian artists just trying to gain a career for themselves through media. Moving on to more analysis on this point, Canadian artists have always contributed to the cultural backdrop of Canada, how the nation is perceived, as well as the lives of everyday Canadians on the ground. Without cultural protectionism, Canada's media industry would have been far too long to develop, likely a shell of what it is today at best. CanCon provides that layer of cultural protectionism that Canada's media industry needs and relies on. In fact, it's probably the main reason to why Canada actually has been able to support many of the diverse and creative artists that aspire to be famous. And without CanCon's regulations, the opportunities and large spread of culture happening in Canadians' media and music industry today wouldn't be occurring right now. CanCon's strategy of protecting Canadian culture isn't just unique to them. It's not just unique to Canada. There is countries like France, South Korea, and Australia, which all have similar regulations to protect their media industries. An example of this is how South Korea's investment in K-pop and film, combined with media regulations, allowed its entertainment industry to thrive globally. They don't rely on any other countries for their media. They can just make it themselves. Now finishing off, before I wrap up, I'd like to ask for a final Q1 from Proposition.
South Korea is successful because they are looking to export culture. Canada just wants to keep it inside the country.
Okay, well for now we want to keep it inside our country, but maybe once we have some more running of CanCon, we would like to export it. But for now we need to focus on having our own cultural protectionism before we grow. That being said, thus, if you believe that if a country's culture is its most important aspect and must be protected at all costs, then you have every right to vote for Team Opposition, and we believe that Canadian culture is always diverse and should be protected. Thank you.
I think the first speaker, and welcome second.
Just a second. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Just a moment, and I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel. CanCon does not help Canada, and instead limits them from reaching full potential. How does that happen? So, I will do a few things in this speech. First, I will bring a few rebuttals to their case, and then I will enter on our argument about limitations. So, to start, Proposition talks about how CanCon gives access to opportunity to artists in Canada and makes them successful. However, many of the examples that we have of successful Canadians, for example, Avril Lavigne, Justin Bieber, Drake, are all signed by American labels. They are not benefiting from CanCon because they are because they had to move out of Canada and go to the US to actually have relevance in the world. So I don't see how they need to prove to me how that is not most of cases, and how CanCon truly helps Canada's artists reach international fame. Also, CanCon is way too strict for people to get support. So we understand that they need to pick certain movies and certain productions to invest on. So how does that truly happen? CanCon will not invest in a small movie made about, minorities and things like that. They will invest in big productions from companies that are already big, actors that are already famous, that will most likely bring them more money. This makes it so that the people receiving this incentive from the government are the people who truly do not need it. The people who truly need it, so for example, native people from Canada, and like from indigenous people and minorities do not actually get a space in this, because the people who even if they meet these regulations, it is less likely for them to get as much help as a movie from a larger company would. Also, when they talk about South Korea, I do not believe that that resembles CanCon in the way that they think it does. I'll accept that in a moment. Because while CanCon is concerned about Canadian people making things for Canadian people, South Korea is trying to export. And that is exactly why they are gaining relevance in the world. While Canada, and they say, oh, but maybe somewhere in the future, Canada will start to export. But CanCon has existed for over 3 decades. So at this point, they should be exporting already. I'll accept your POI before going to my argument.
Can you give me a specific recognition explanation as to why indigenous artists won't get funding, more funding, or the same funding as larger companies?
Okay, because if I want to, CanCon is essentially an investment. It's an investment from the government, in a way. So why would I want to invest in something that I don't think will bring me revenue? Why would I invest in something that I don't think will do well? The type of thing that does well globally and internally in the countries are productions with already famous people from bigger companies that have more money to invest in them. These, we're not talking about, for example, a small documentary talking about the native people of Canada. That's not what's happening. Sometimes, maybe, but in general, these are productions that didn't need this support, and so this money is just kind of, in a way, being wasted and could be going to different funding. So what we believe is that if CanCon ceases to exist, the money that goes into CanCon annually could be used to support Canadian art in other ways. We believe art is essential, but we do not believe that CanCon helps art in the way that it should, in the way that it was created to. Also, we believe a main stakeholder in this debate is the consumer, because when you have regulations such as CanCon, which are very strict, you have a less variety of people and ideas. So you have less international collaboration, and when you are obliged to follow certain standards, it is less likely that you have original ideas and kind of disruptive things. Content will most likely decrease in quality because it will be they will be trying to just meet certain standards and get some money because they do not truly want to make great productions. They just want funding. POI?
So you said earlier that Canadian artists like Justin Bieber are working with other countries, but if this is true, isn't this exactly why we need CanCon? If other countries are so much bigger that Canadian artists won't or are going to join them, then isn't this worth changing using CanCon?
No, exactly, because the point is, Justin Bieber, Avril Lavigne, all these people, the reason why they needed to get out of Canada and go to the US is because CanCon does not make Canada's industry stronger. It just makes it so that they have no impact in the rest of the world. The only impact they have is inside of Canada. So you, as an artist, you get two choices. Either A, you stay in Canada, go to a small label that most likely you will have larger contracts and you will be stuck with them for more time, or you leave the country and don't get this financial support, but you have a much higher chance of actually making it being famous globally. POI.
Before you move on, can you clarify what your burden is?
Okay, so our burden is to prove how Canadian artists are leaving the country to actually be famous, and because as happened with Avril Lavigne, Justin Bieber, and etc. And also, our burden is to prove how being so strict as it is, CanCon limits not only creativity but the reach, and that is exactly what I will go into right now. So, as for creativity, Canada is a very diverse country. They are very multicultural, and this is something that is really embedded in Canadian people. They have like very different points of view, especially because they were colonized by both France and England, so this is a very diverse country. But when you are talking about limiting creativity, when you're talking about limiting what people can do in art, which is a major form of expression and social change, you are going against a lot of Canadian values. So, when you are not limiting them only creativity, but also by making it so that, for example, you need to invest this much in CanCon, you need this much of your profit needs to go back to the country. You have to have this and this percentage of people that are Canadian in your movie or production. You are limiting the reach of this, because, for example, if I'm a Canadian director or casting director, I have to pick a Canadian actress, but maybe my movie would do much better if I were to hire an American actress that would bring more buzz to my movie. People internationally, you see, like, I don't know, a movie with Brad Pitt, and people are like, oh my god, Brad Pitt, I want to see this movie. They don't care about the content. Names are very important, and that is exactly the problem when you are making these people be limited in their choices because you are preventing them from actually reaching global success in both music, film industry, and everything. So that is exactly why CanCon is very bad for Canada currently. I'm very glad to propose.
I think the second proposition speaker, and welcome the second one.
Hold on. Sorry. Time starts on my first word, which is now. To put it simply, Canada would not have an entertainment industry with enthusiastic, diverse artists without the CanCon regulations. They have quite literally paved the way for the music and film industry to thrive and survive in Canada, especially with the American monopoly. So proud to stand on side opposition. Today, I'll firstly be providing our third contention for our side, and then I'll be addressing some of the things that they said by giving rebuttal and then some reconstruction. Let's move on to the third and final contention for our side. Our final contention is on how CanCon benefits artists and creatives. CanCon regulations have been uniquely beneficial to artists, acting as an integrated framework to centralize the benefits from public programs and media quotas to promote artistry in Canada. Perhaps the most obvious benefit that CanCon has posed for artists and creatives lies in its ability to help Canadian artists by ensuring their music is played on radio, supporting the Canadian music industry, and providing funding opportunities through various initiatives. This looks like broadcasters being required to contribute to the development of Canadian music talent through funding initiatives, organizations like the Canada Music Fund and Factor founding assisting Canadian talent on recordings, providing financial support for recording, producing music videos, and touring. This is of particular benefit to artists from marginalized backgrounds who are most likely to lack a social or financial safety net, preventing them from engaging in a creative profession. A Tribe Called Red and Jeremy Dutcher are examples of Indigenous artists that have been helped through and by CanCon regulations. Without CanCon, we would have far fewer institutional supports for these artists, leading to less diverse media for Canadians as well as the international community. We all stand to benefit from hearing their stories, and it's through the promotion of their artistry that we work towards a more united and empathetic Canadian society. We also strongly believe that in order to further branch out, to the global public, you must have a stable music industry in your country, which we believe that Canada can continue to work on, especially through CanCon. Proposition might try and argue that they would support other kinds of legislation to prop up Canadian arts and media, but no other program or policy would have the same efficacy without the use of mandatory quotas for the promotion of Canadian content. The beauty of CanCon regulations is that it combines quotas with institutional structures for promoting Canadian media, maximizing exposure and benefits to Canadian artists of all walks of life. Plus, CanCon doesn't just protect artists, it also encourages innovation. CanCon allows artists to take the creative risks that they want to take by providing them with a stable entertainment industry, which directly increases innovation. A Canadian band called Mariana's Trench is an example of this. When a country has a stable entertainment industry that they know won't collapse, that is when artists can actually create music with the security of knowing that it actually has a possibility of going viral and that it has a possibility for them to fulfill their dreams. Without CanCon, Canadian music will be forced to cater to the U.S. industry demands of completely destroying innovation. This also further impacts out to global culture because a world with CanCon funds experimentation in a way that a world absent of CanCon never could and never will. Let's go into some rebuttal. So first, addressing what they said in the Prime Minister's speech, they kind of misunderstand the motion. The motion for this debate is this House opposes CanCon regulations. They give an argument on how the Canadian people aren't going to watch it, and how the consumers matter, and how consumers get to choose what they want to watch, and how consumers aren't watching Canadian content. This is just false in itself, right? A lot of Canadian people, like I'm Canadian for example, I watch Canadian content all the time that falls under CanCon regulation. There's so many pieces of Canadian content that I watch, for example, a shit trail. It's a piece that I watch that's literally a piece of Canadian content, right? Can people do indeed watch Canadian content? It's just false in itself, and even then it misunderstands the motion. Their burden is to prove to you why they should oppose Canadian content for whatever reasons. Their burden is not to prove to you that Canadian consumers will watch Canadian content. We just have to prove to you that CanCon is good to Canadian consumers and good to Canadian artists and good to Canadian media. Our burden is not to prove to you that they will watch it, right? That's up to them because they have free will. Even then they talk about how we're not getting revenue or anything, and how the government's like spending too much money on like funding these like musicians and these artists, right? However, like we stated in the case that I just gave, there's literally organizations that fund these artists, right? The government isn't directly funding them. The government implements CanCon regulations, which are then required to funding organizations. So if like a piece of media or an artist fulfills CanCon regulations, then a funding organization can fund them and will fund them and must fund them because they do it, right? It's literally mandatory, right? There's nothing, there's like, you can't not fund them. The government isn't funding them. I don't get where like a compromising revenue is coming from. Let's move on to their DPM speech. They give examples in Avril Lavigne and Justin Bieber and Drake on how they didn't benefit from CanCon. That's 3 examples, and even then it just proves that you need industry in your own country to actually branch out, right? For example, if CanCon never existed, Canada would not have a music industry. It's as simple as that. Avril Lavigne, Justin Bieber, and Drake literally may not even have the dream to become a musician or an artist in the first place, because of the fact that Canada would simply not have a music industry because it would just not be strong enough, right? CanCon was what literally provided Canada with the stability that they needed, right? Because Canada's next to America. America literally dominates the music and film industry so much in the Western world, right? Because of the fact that CanCon existed, Canada was able to separate and was able to not be completely dominated by American music and film industry, right? This literally is just extremely beneficial, and we prove to you that throughout our case. We also tell you that firstly, it's just beneficial in general. We tell you that we have to use CanCon, and we still need CanCon in our world in order to further to separate Canadian media from American media. Also, they talk about how like South Korea doesn't resemble CanCon. This is quite irrelevant, I feel like, because it was a little example that I gave in our contention. Even then, we'll just push back real quick. South Korea has regulations similar to CanCon for their own country. Even then, they talk about how CanCon has existed for over 3 decades, but still hasn't done anything apparently. CanCon has done so much for Canada, right? Genuinely, because of the fact we tell you throughout our case, and we literally tell you that CanCon was established because Canada did not have a music industry, right? We believe that it still continues to, we still need CanCon, right? CanCon's gonna continuously be updated. It's literally being updated right now. There's an update like a few weeks ago to help CanCon, to make CanCon better, right? So we'd say that we still need CanCon because especially, right? They give great examples on how like CanCon, on how like Canada media needs to be better, right? This just proves that we need CanCon more, right? Since CanCon helped establish Canadian media in the first place, what better idea do you need in order to make Canadian media even better? CanCon helped establish Canadian media in the first place, which is why you can continue to make it better. They talk about how consumers are the main actor. We agree consumers are important. However, we'd say that in order for consumers to actually be fulfilled, you need solid artists that actually want to innovate, and artists that actually want to create media, and artists that feel like that they're safe with creating media and that they can actually be successful through their own dreams. We literally proved to you throughout all our speeches why we are already successful in fulfilling our burden, which is on to prove to you how CanCon has been able to successfully fulfill its purpose and why you should not oppose it, right? Because of the fact that CanCon has just been generally beneficial towards Canadian content and Canadian media. We tell you this in our first mention on how it protects Canadian media. We have cultural protectionism on our side. We do not want Canadian sovereignty and Canadian media to be threatened. We also proved in our second mention on how it disrupts the American Hollywood bubble. We need to overthrow it because of the fact that it genuinely can overtake Canadian media. And finally, in our third mention that I just gave you, we proved to you how it actually benefits to artists and creative, especially Indigenous artists. Thus, not only do we take down our older contentions already in this debate, we proved to you how we already fulfill our burden, how we already outweigh our impacts, and finally how CanCon has actually been beneficial and why we should not oppose it. So proud to stand outside opposition, and I strongly urge a ballot. Thank you.
I think we have an opposition.
Okay, I will start in my next word. So, if team opposition fights so much to have recognition of Canadians' policies and movies that every company that they have to spend in CanCon, actually they just make them far, far away from this dream that they have in their entire case. So, panel, understand. We have two main clashes in this debate. The first clash is about efficiency and the second about the quality. But before going to this clash, I will do a disclaimer really quickly. Panel, understand that they said to me that they watch Canadian content, that they want to watch. So when they say that they watch Canadian content, the Canadian population is still watching Canadian content, they already proved to me that there is no need for regulation. If the Canadian population is already seeing all the Canadian content, that's like, they proved to me that no need for regulation. The regulation in this case won't be necessary because all the Canadian are still watching Canadian content. So there is no need for regulation for proving that a United States will dominate the entire Canada. So okay, panel, let's understand. Now we are going to the first clash in this debate. Panel, understand. They talk to me about the efficiency and on all this stuff, but understand that the efficiency in this side of the house isn't as clear as they said. So why isn't efficient in all this debate? Understand, the first thing, they don't address any protection for Quebecois or natives. So what they try to say to me that they need so to protect them, they need some protections, but there are still populations that are not represented. So let's understand when they're trying to say that, for example, Quebecois, they speak French, but we have to understand that they don't speak even just French. They speak English and they speak French. So it's not something that will limit them. So the second point in this clash of efficiency. So they said about the liberty, but the liberty on both sides of the house is already restricted. When you watch a channel, when they watch you put a channel, you watch what the channel wants to put there. So the liberty in their side of the house is already restricted. So the third mechanism that we have for quality. So exists a loss in the outcomes for the production and exists a loss for the consumers. Understand, panel, what we are trying to paint in this debate is that in their side of the house, what happens is that all the companies will receive the outcomes that they have for productions, and also the consumers don't receive all the benefits. And why this occurs? First thing, panel, understand when they try to put all these regulations, they are just putting something that the population will not like to watch, so they will watch something that they won't like. So first thing, the prime time the TV has in their TV will not exist anymore because they will put a content that don't have quality and there will not have consumers. So in this side of the house, we know that will be lost in the outcomes of the producers, and two, in the consumers that will not consume this content that they're trying to say in this debate. So understand, panel, what they try to say in this debate that there is already quality and they must promote something that will help CanCon. But understand, CanCon have some funds of 600 millions, but we prove that isn't enough. 600 millions, you can prove a better, a good film to understand that all the Canada it's represented by this film. So understand that when you have only 600 millions in this quotas, you must do like 10 films that aren't really good, but understand, these films will be totally repetitive for all the population, and more than this, panel, they won't like to address for the CanCon culture. So understand, all they try to paint in this debate that there exists something that they can't avoid the dominance of US, but we already proved to you that all they try to prove to us is exactly what the consumers won't like, and the consumers will avoid to watch this content. So what we think here is that another clash in this debate is about the quality. What we are saying about the quality. One, the quality is totally lost because there exists a lot of strict standards. So what this means, panels, understand that due to this standard, they are losing good productions, they are losing good cameras, and more than this, they are losing good films. So with these 5 strict standards, they are just losing all the consumers and all the good producers because it's so much bureaucracy. They don't have any incentive to produce something that will be extremely good for them and for the consumers. So with all these strict standards that can promote in the Canada, it just make the quality even lower. So understand, the second mechanism that we have for the quality is that for trying to to export their culture, they must try to be more generic. So Canada will try to export the culture, and more than this, panel, understand that when they try to export the culture, they must be generic because all the world will watch what they are trying to paint. So when they are trying to paint something for the entire world, they will be most generic because anyone wants to know only about the culture of Canada. So they will try to make something in a generic way, and that will be that will give like a proximity for US that they just trying to say in this debate. So understand, panel, how the quality in this debate will be less. Understand that all the consumers are forced to watch this Canadian content, and these consumers will not like what they are watching. So due to the fact that they are just forced to watch what Canada is putting for them, they will not like to watch what they are trying to paint in this debate. So the quality will be lost, and the efficiency of the CanCon isn't exist in this debate. Understand that when they said about the quality, we proved to that will be a forced thing that all the Canadian content will be extremely regulated, and they must force the consumers to watch these things. So understand, panel, we have some things in the debate that they must prove to us that they have no efficiency, so CanCon isn't necessary and isn't enough. So they try to paint to me that there is enough because they have so many quotas, but we say that these quotas aren't enough for produce good films, and more than this, produce more and more films to not be repetitive. So what they try to think in this debate that in our Sabra house, we are promoting something that will be a best thing in our scenario, and more than this, the consumers will be happy with what they are watching. So understand, panel, what we are trying to say in this, it's like the streamings are even higher in this scenario. So what we see is that even with CanCon, in the Canadian content and in the Canadian Netflix, there are still top 8 still American. So what they're trying to say is that they will avoid this, but we proved to you that the quality is like in the streamings are even higher in this point. So we see that the CanCon, for example, the Netflix still top 8. So panel, even with the CanCon, they are being fighting so much, saying that holding the US influence, we can show to you that the things that the people like the most are still American. So despite the things that they try to say to me, they try to paint off us, it's about this, and we don't buy this burden that they try to put on us, and we think that's not even necessary. So understand, panel, what they try to say to me is that it will be extremely good for protect the Canadian culture, but the thing that Canadian culture is not being represented, and it's not being necessarily represented by CanCon. So understand, we have some rebuttals now. Understand that what they try to say to me is that artists as Drake is just a big artist because of CanCon, but we think that's not necessary. Drake don't even use the CanCon quotas. So what we are trying to paint in this debate is that CanCon quotas isn't enough, and more than this, aren't efficient. So understand that they try to paint that they don't watch TV anymore, but this is not still relevant. So what we're trying to put in this debate is that the quality will be less, and more than this, the efficiency will be less also. So what the implications that I'm saying to you this panel. So understand that with CanCon, in their side of the house with CanCon, they are not only avoiding better resource to more quality because they are not allowing good producers or good films for US, so they are avoiding quality resource. That's something that they claim so much in this debate. So all these things that they are claiming so much in this debate about the quality, they are avoiding better resource because the 5 strict standards that they have in their side of the house are just doing something that's still not good for them. So I'm extremely proud to oppose.
He's the proposition speaker. Welcome to
Judge ready? Opponents ready? Time starts on my first word. They keep telling you about efficiency and quality and all of this fluff and their arguments and contentions and keep restating the same thing. But what you actually have to think about, Judge, is have we met our burden and have they met their burden? So in today's debate, I'll be giving you 2 clashes, some analysis, some rebuilding, and some extension on refutation from both my partners. So moving on to clash 1, the efficiency of CanCon. So they tell you that CanCon is inefficient. They give a few layers here. Layer 1, People are not watching CanCon media, and that makes them lose revenue, and we have a few responses here. So the first response is that their line of reasoning is quite flawed. A, even if the profit that media artists make from films and shows are not optimal and are not a great amount of money, without CanCon, these shows would have never existed in the first place. So on the practical level, we still outweigh in some sort of economic impact. B, even if you buy what they tell you about economy and how we're not making any revenue, we tell you revenue is not the priority here in today's debate. On the principle level, what is CanCon's goal? Let's cycle back to our burden for today's debate. We need to prove that CanCon has achieved their goal of making some sort of dent in the media monopoly. We tell you that regardless of revenue, whatever they tell you on their side of the house and their impacts, as long as there is Canadian media advancement since the implementation of CanCon in 1970, we access our impact, fulfill our burden, and thus, because of this line of analysis, your ballot is already decisively opposition. Speaking of burdens, they tell you that their burdens to prove that some artists have left Canada to pursue American content. Judge, on our side of the house, we believe that this burden is laughably low. This burden is quite literally a fact, so to win this debate, we would tell you that the proposition needs to prove to us that CanCon has not had some sort of positive impact on Canadian media, although it might be far too late in today's debate. Number two, the second clash here is quality. We don't think that this is a huge clash in today's debate, but let's adopt it as a clash anyways, right? So they tell you that, okay, TV doesn't give you liberty, and that's why it's bad, and people resort to streaming services, and that's why we're losing money, that's why, Canadian content is suffering, that's why streaming services are taking all of our money and revenue. Even though, yes, streaming services are inherently and fundamentally very prominent and they do make a lot of money, CanCon is already working and succeeding in partnering with such services to extend Canadian culture like Crave, Netflix, etc. So they also tell you that, okay, CanCon is limiting the reach of Canadian artists. We would tell you that that is exactly why we need regulations like CanCon to make the Canadian media presence a lot larger, so that we don't have our producers, artists leaving the country. And okay, sure, there are a few examples like Justin Bieber or Drake, but if they want to play this game of kind of example tennis, we tell you that, okay, the bands and artists that have been helped by the CanCon organization include Mariana's Trench, Tribe Called Red, Jeremy Dutcher, Nickelback, and Michael Bublé. I'm sure you have heard of at least a few of these names, right? Okay, so before I continue, is there a POI from the proposition?
What about productions that are about Canada but do not fit CanCon regulations because they are made by companies from the US, for example?
Well, wait, sorry. Can you rephrase that?
For example, there are films like Turning Red, that is Disney. It's a story about a girl that lives in Canada, but it does not fit CanCon. How does CanCon help Canadian histories like this, stories like this?
Well, either way, it still promotes Canadian